Thank you very much.
Again, for this very kind invitation for the second year that I'm here, and I'm pleased to be here and talk about some innovations coming from my country, Israel, and in general as well. So I received a task to speak about my vision about the cath lab of the future, and I was thinking what to speak about. These are my disclosures. So if I think about the cath lab of the future, I think we need to focus on several aspects. One is the reduction of radiation and contrast, radiation both to the patient and the operator. We can use robotics in the cath lab, and I can show you some examples. We need enhanced imaging with co-registration. And I think the second thing that I think of when I think about the cath lab of the future is like over the decade we experienced a revolution in structural intervention, namely in the field of TAVI. And I think we should expect a second wave, a very large wave of structural intervention. I think we're going to still see some expanded indications with TAVI. I think we're going to see mitral and tricuspid intervention, and of course heart failure interventions, which I speak in my next presentation. So this is just an example. We know that the need for contrast load in PCI procedure is growing, and as you can see here, you can see that the number of patients with acute kidney injury is increasing, and actually over 40% of death after cardiac catheterization or PCI occur in combination with acute kidney injury. And you can see one technology over here, which is a dynamic roadmap that you can do the entire procedure under this dynamic roadmap. You can do the wiring and balloon dilatation and the insertion of stents. We can use robotics, and this is actually something that already exists, and I think it's just the beginning of it. This is Corindos, a company coming from Israel, already installed several robotic cath labs around the world. And you can see this was the cath lab of the past. You can see this is the old one, and this is what we have in the present. And I think in the near future, and actually in the existing present as well, you can see that there is a console where the operator can be off lead and perform the procedure from far away. You can see this is the interventional cockpit, the operator console, and the robotic drive far away from him. This is a single-use cassette, and this is what you see again, the control console. And theoretically, you can do it even from here. You can sit in an exotic island and perform a complex PCI everywhere you want in the world. Actually, another aspect of this robotic navigation system is the co-registration with the CT angio. I think in the future we're going to see more and more from that. And as you can see here, we can actually perform it via the robot, and under CT co-registration, as you can see here, you can actually have virtual landmarks of where you want to put the stent. You can have a QCA online using a CT, no need for fluoroscopy or contrast. And there's no radiation, no contrast material, and you can deliver your stent without fluoro, just under CT, using the robot until you reach these landmarks that you chose from in the beginning, and you can implant it, and actually you can confirm the appropriateness of stent position by IVUS or OCT, so there's no need for fluoroscopy or contrast dye use. Another aspect, this is another company coming from Israel, it's called Real View Imaging. This is a hologram, a 3D hologram that you can get just in your cath lab. As you can see here in this film, this is a 3D image, real image of your patient that you can actually see in your cath lab while you do a structural or other procedures. And this actually is not a science fiction. This is already installed in several hospitals around the world. So we need better imaging and imaging fusion, as you can see here, hybrid imaging of IVUS and OCT, and image co-registration with the IVUS, with the OCT, with your fluoroscopy. So what about structural interventions? As I said in the beginning, I think that there is going to be a second large wave of structural intervention. I think we're going to move from a diagnostic cut, PCI. Currently, in most of the cases, the majority of the workload in our cath labs to do more structural, aortic, mitral, left atrial appendage, tricuspid. I think we're going to see more and more heart failure interventions, hypertension treatment, hybrid procedure, vascular and neurovascular. As you can see, the projection of TAVI cases, just TAVI, is going to explode in the next decade, especially after the PARTNER 3 with the expansion of indication to low-risk patients. And as you can see here, you can see this was the beginning of TAVI. In the beginning of TAVI, this on the left side, you can see how crowded was the room with many operators, anesthesiologists, TE guy, and now the minimalist TAVI that we do in our center, actually we do it under local anesthesia with no sedation, no echo guidance, no anesthesiologist, so it's going to be PCI-like. I think TAVI for non-classical aortic stenosis indications is just in the beginning. We know that we can treat failed aortic bioprosthesis, we can treat bicuspid aortic valve, and we can treat pure aortic regurgitation patients. This is, we know from Danny Dvir's work, the global registry of valve-in-valve. This is a very successful procedure, and you can actually establish excellent results, as in this case that we did several years ago. You can see a patient with mitral flow 21, with severe aortic stenosis and regurgitation with bad hemodynamics, as you can see here in the circle. And just after a very easy implantation, you can achieve excellent result with no stenosis and no significant aortic regurgitation. We can also do a valve-in-valve procedure, and this is also the beginning for failed mitral bioprosthesis. As you can see here, this is again a very easy procedure which is going to expand in the future, in the near future. And actually, the valve-in-valve procedure just received the 2A indication by the ESC valvular guidelines. What about bicuspid valve? I think, and there's a question mark, are they not suitable for TAVI? And I think the answer is yes, they are suitable for TAVI, although the annulus is different, the classification is asymmetric, and there's a combined disease of the valve and the ascending aorta. And this is a large registry just recently published last year showing that we can do it with acceptable results. It is not like the regular TAVI that we do, but yes, with this new generation devices, we can treat bicuspid aortic valves. We can take it even to the extreme. This is a case from my center of a patient with LVAD. You know that some of them develop pure aortic insufficiency, which is very, very hard to treat. And one potential treatment could be TAVI. As you can see here, this is a normal valve with severe aortic insufficiency that we can approach via transcatheter implantation. And you can see the stage of implantation, excellent results with an Evolut 34 valve with excellent no residual aortic regurgitation. So we can take it to the extreme. What about the mitral and tricuspid valve? We know that the mitral valve is different. That's why it takes a little bit longer. And I think Dr. Sievert showed you how many devices, companies, startup companies are in the field of mitral, and I think he counted almost 200 companies. And the reason that there are 200 companies, it means that there is no good one solution for that. And we know that the mitral valve is different than the aortic valve. But still, we are just in the beginning. Sorry. We know that there were several acquisitions by the industry, by all the large companies. They acquired startup companies, but unfortunately none of them is going to be, probably none of them is going to be the solution in the future. So it's a process of development, and actually we need new ideas and new startup companies in this field. This is the device that acquired by Abbott. You know, this is the Tendyne transapical approach. My personal belief that transapical approach would not be the solution, and every company, every startup company, every idea approaching the mitral valve should think from the beginning about the transeptal approach and don't rely on the transapical approach only. So this is the Abbott one, and they have some first-in-man and some studies, some clinical studies showing good results. This is the Medtronic Intrepid TMVR system. Again, a very nice design of the valve. Again, very good for the transapical approach. I'm not sure that they are proceeding with the transeptal approach as well. And they have also the first-in-man results are excellent. They can treat and actually eliminate the mitral regurgitation almost to zero. This is a company coming from Israel. Again, the problem with this company is that they have only a transapical version. This is the Tayara by Neovasc. What's unique about them is that they actually designed a D-shaped valve trying to avoid LVOT obstruction with this device. And they had very nice results, animal results, and actually they implanted more than 40 patients already with some good results, but again, it is only transapical approach, and I think this is not going to be the future. Can I move forward? Okay. What about mitral rings? This is another option. You know this company. Again, coming from Israel, Valtech with the cardioband. This is a widely used already with a CE mark available in Europe with this cardioband. This is not an easy procedure to do. It takes several hours to implant this annuloplasty ring. I can't forward my slides. This is another company called Mitraline with actually a device that can put a suture around your annulus and cinch it with two pledgets and therefore allowing to reduce the size of the mitral valve annulus. And there, again, this is an example from the first-in-man study where they can actually, as you can see, the difference between the left and the right, you can see the reduction of the size of the mitral valve annulus. This is again a company coming from Israel called Valker. It's another idea of a ring with anchors. As you can see here, the first version is transapical. They're going to have a version, a transeptal version as well. And this is a case that we did in my center, the first-in-man case. You can see the implantation via the transapical approach of the valve. This is a surgeon view with the ring implanted from the left atria to the valve with excellent results, with good apposition of the mitral valve, of the mitral ring around the annulus. What about tricuspid valve repair? This is the former repair system by Edwards. This is a very elegant but somehow difficult to implant in the tricuspid position. They have some clinical experience in this study of 7 patients with some reductions of the TR grade. This is the Mitraline, the same concept of the suture around the valve, applying it in the tricuspid valve. This is the first-in-man study with actually 6 patients already with 100% success rate, which is quite remarkable, but still this is a very difficult and time-consuming procedure. So if I summarize my vision as the title of my presentation of the cath lab of the future, I think we're going to see more and more robotic cath labs with some versions about that. We for sure going to see enhanced imaging with co-registration with the CT. I think maybe in the future even interventional MRI will come into the field of interventional cardiology. They're already there for electrophysiology. And I think that structural will overcome coronary intervention as the main volume in our cath labs, and we need to get ready for that. I think still in the field of aortic, even in the aortic era, we are still in the beginning. Of course, the atrioventricular valve and heart failure intervention, which is the title of my next presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Amit. Very great presentations. It's open for questions and discussions. Are there any questions in the audience? Yes, please.
Hello. In robotic PCI, the cassette, can it accommodate imaging catheters like IVAS and OCT?
Sorry?
In Corindas, in robotic PCI, that cassette, can it accommodate imaging catheters, IVAS catheters, and OCT catheters?
No.
No?
Actually, it does not accommodate the IVUS and OCT yet. It just, the beginning of the basics of PCI.
Well, Amit, one question you said in the end, whether structural will overcome coronary interventions by numbers or by the volume of the money and resources spent on that?
I think for sure by the value and by the time spent in the cath lab, that's for sure. But I assume that also in volume. I think the coronary intervention will more or less stay the same or even decline in the next decade, and I think we're going to see the structural, not just valvular, all structural will overcome. That's my prediction.
Well, thank you very much. Now we will connect with Cardiovascular Research Foundation in New York City, and Juan Granada will present from New York. In the next talk, what we plan, я буду говорить по-русски. Две презентации из Нью-Йорка. Juan Granada will present innovations in заболеваниях периферических сосудов. И в следующей презентации экспериментальная медицина. Juan Granada, can you hear you?
Alex, can you? Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you well. Can you guys hear me?
So we're here. We have a very nice image. First time I can see you in wearing glasses. Please, we can start.
Listen, I'm getting old. I need the glasses to be able to see the small font on my computer. So can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, excellent.
That's fantastic. Good afternoon, everybody. It's actually a great pleasure for me to be in TCT Russia, even if it's, virtually. The next talk actually aims to summarize the state of innovation on the endovascular field. I mean, right now, it is a field with a significant amount of technologies and diversity, and a very, very diverse field that is actually trying to solve a lot of clinical issues. One of the first technologies that actually I want to, or group of technologies that I want to present is large bore sheath field. And right now that we are actually trying to develop, bigger devices for the treatment of a mitral or tricuspid, or actually heart failure devices, the size of the sheets are actually getting bigger and bigger, and it's going to take a while until actually they go back to the regular size sheets. We're talking actually on the venous size. The venous side is approximately right now in the order of 38 French. On the arterial side, TAVR is getting smaller, but actually some ancillary devices are using big devices and sheets as well. So this is actually one of the examples of technologies that are trying to address the potential complications of large bore bleeding. This is the Sarana's device that is a sheath integrated with sensors. Once the sheath is introduced into the vessel, it has the possibility of monitoring online, live, the potential for bleeding. And as you can actually see here in this graph, in an experimental model, once you start actually having bleeding around the sheath, immediately the device detects that and actually lets the operator know, so the operator can actually make a change in the procedural conduct. Going on the same line, there's a wide variety of large bore vascular closure devices. This is one of the examples that is called the enclosure vascular closure device. It's actually a very simple device, approximately 14 French delivery system. It doesn't require pre-procedure sheath exchange, and is right now CE mark for up to 21 French arterial sheath. But to be perfectly honest, with the devices that we're using right now, especially on the venous side, for valvular heart disease intervention, this actually sounds relatively a small device. So this is actually extremely relevant, because now most of these devices were designed for the arterial side of things. And right now there is a large amount of devices, as presented in the previous talk, that essentially are going through the venous side and are actually way above 24 French. Another important field that is emerging drastically in the peripheral vascular field is the assessment of tissue level perfusion. And this is extremely relevant for the peripheral interventionalist, especially in patients with critical limb ischemia, because it is difficult to differentiate viability from non-viability in these cases. And sometimes these patients arrive to the labs and they really don't know if the ulcer that the patient has corresponds to an area that is viable or not. And this is actually an area of intense investigation. There are at least 4 companies, if not more, trying to develop multiple imaging tools, trying to essentially assess the viability and level of perfusion for patients with peripheral vascular disease. And it's interesting because this technology can be used for assessment of ischemia, but also can be used for assessment of success of intervention, but also can be used as a follow-up tool for patients after intervention to see if they're actually getting ischemic again. Another area of intense investigation, believe it or not, especially for BTK interventions, is the use of dedicated CTO crossing devices. And this is actually one of the examples using actually shockwave technology that essentially drills in a very aggressive fashion the highly calcified vessels that essentially are found in below-the-knee applications. This is actually a technology that started on the coronary field and is now moving into peripheral vascular interventions as well. Drug-coated balloons, right now, there's a lot of controversy with paclitaxel devices for peripheral intervention, but there is actually a plethora of devices right now using sirolimus-based products. On the balloon coating side, there is a lot of variations with companies using microcrystalline sirolimus coatings. Bibron actually has a very active program with sirolimus 4 micrograms per millimeter square. There's a lot of companies working on drug encapsulation, such as Concept Medical, Mid-Alliance, and Sahajanat Medical. And also there are companies working on dedicated drug delivery technologies, such as Caliber Therapeutics, that is using a nanoporous balloon and dedicated nanospheres of polymer that contains sirolimus and can actually release drug in a highly controlled fashion over time in a very similar pharmacokinetic profile compared to drug-eluting stent. Also, there is an increased interest and a lot of work on development of bioresorbable scaffolds for peripheral vascular applications. This is one of the examples of a sirolimus-eluting peripheral VRS that is actually called the Credence BTK, that is right now in intense investigation for this type of patients, especially for proximal vessels, with a hypothesis of essentially delivering a device that can provide a scaffold effect, but actually disappears over time. One of the biggest challenges is to overcome the mechanical difficulties of peripheral vessels, especially with the high levels of calcification. Going on the same path of development, there is a lot of work on the development of innovative devices for patients that actually have few options. It's actually called the no-option patient for peripheral vascular disease and critical limb ischemia. This is actually one of those examples that tries to do percutaneous deep vein arterialization, essentially with the objective of creating a bypass between the artery and the vein. And as you can actually see here, the whole idea is you go from the proximal artery, go to the vein, and then go back to the artery, and you create an artificial bypass with actually very interesting data, essentially showing that healing can be accelerated and perfusion can actually be improved in these patients, at least temporarily, just to actually salvage the limb. On the venous side, there is actually a lot of work right now and a lot of interest. This is a very interesting company that is actually called Blue Leaf. It's using a 16 French retrograde common femoral axis. It's actually non-implantable, and the whole idea is to induce a controlled vein wall dissection and actually create new leaflets in actually large veins for patients with venous insufficiency. And it's actually very interesting because by creating these dissections, they can actually create these actually flaps that actually act as a leaflet and can potentially relieve the patients with significant lower extremity edema, related to venous insufficiency. So it's actually very interesting. The final result is to actually end up with artificial leaflets that are created from the same patient's veins. Pulmonary embolism treatment is, right now a big area of interest in peripheral innovation. You see here one of the devices that right now is moving forward very rapidly in the U.S. It's called the Inari Flow Retriever. It's actually a device that actually has three different components to actually drag the clot out of the pulmonary artery. Goes into a 20 French system device, and it's actually very simple, as you can actually see here. And you see a clinical example of a baseline with a very large clot and 48 hours post removal. Very effective device that right now is very active in the United States. This was one of the Shark Tank innovation winners at TCT several years ago. Finally, a lot of work also in patients with pulmonary hypertension. This is one of the examples that is actually using ultrasound for intravascular pulmonary denervation that is called TIVUS. And the whole idea is to denervate the pulmonary arteries in patients with pulmonary hypertension, and they're trying to expand the population to also heart failure and other indications as well. So as you can actually see, for the people that enjoy working on the venous side, there are a lot of emerging solutions, not only for vein treatment, but also all the way to pulmonary hypertension treatment and pulmonary embolism treatment as well. And just finally, as part of actually this session, there was a lot of talk about radiation. There are several group of technologies working on radiation exposure reduction. I wanted to highlight this just because the simplicity is called actually the egg nest system, that is pretty much a series of shields that actually are put strategically on the table and strategically located to reduce radiation by 90% to the operator. And this is a topic that is becoming more and more and more relevant, and a lot of people are actually looking for ways to reduce radiation by the use of multiple technologies. So finally, one thing that I always say is that deeply concerns me is it seems like technology is outpacing the capacity to process information and training. I really think that these meetings like TCT Russia are essential to essentially teach people what is coming up, but especially because we need to really, train people in how to do procedures on complex 3D anatomical abnormalities and adapt to techniques not learned during interventional training and navigate catheters in unknown anatomical spaces. So it's important to know what is coming up so people get prepared for the future, because I really think the catheter-based endovascular field is going to grow exponentially within the next 10 to 20 years. So thank you for your attention, everybody, and if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Juan. Great presentation, a lot of technologies. So now it's a great conclusion how to learn all this new technology. It's required a lot of time. And it's a big innovations in the peripheral space specifically.
Hi, Juan. It's Amit here from Moscow, from Israel. Very, very nice presentation. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you well.
I wanted to ask you a generalized question. Many cardiology programs adopted vascular medicine program. This is mainly because of the COMPASS data, for example, that showed that patients with coronary artery disease with PVD, they benefit more from rivaroxaban, for example. And what do you think about that? About the fact that I think we need to expand our awareness about the existence of PVD in our CAD patients, and who should be responsible for that? I know that in many hospitals it's not part of cardiology. In my hospital it does. So what is your opinion about that? Who should take care of this vascular medicine field?
Listen, number one, nice to see you moderating this session, and thank you for attending TCT Russia. I mean, you guys, in Israel are a real, hub for innovation. It's great to have you with us. Listen, one thing that is interesting, at least in the U.S., and I really think it's been actually poorly designed, is there is a war between specialties in terms of who takes care of these patients. And Alex knows very well, because he was very involved on also the commercial aspects of the peripheral vascular intervention, that we have at least 4 groups: interventional cardiologists, we have interventional radiologists, we have vascular surgeons, and we have a whole bunch of people in between. One of the things that I really think is essential is that you have, or anybody or any center actually has a dedicated group that essentially work these patients. It doesn't matter what the specialty is, to be perfectly honest, as long as there is a dedicated group that is integrated to the catheter-based group. And the reason is because once you start actually going very technical, like for example on BTK interventions, or for example like a PE treatment, it now is not like as simple as opening an SFA. I mean, anybody can open an SFA, I think. But once you actually go into like, below the knee with critical limb ischemia, now you actually need wound healing specialists. Now you need actually people, specialists on diagnosis of peripheral vascular disease and treatment and care of wounds. And the thing is, actually, I would say that most important than who should treat it is how to treat it. And actually having dedicated centers of excellence for peripheral vascular intervention is actually critically needed.
Well, thank you, Juan, and we're ready to start your second presentation. The second presentation.
Yeah, so this one here, I actually thought that I would give it a spin and actually talk about strategic and translational drivers for clinical success, because, I mean, we are all excited about innovation. We are exposed to innovation one way or the other, but not very frequently, people and the audience essentially hears about what are the real drivers, for success to actually take a program from an idea all the way to a successful outcome. And the first thing that actually I wanted to say is, people actually believe innovation is really fun. And I have to tell you, it's not really fun, actually, most of the times, because it's actually frequently a very lonely, challenging, and frustrating process. So actually, you really need to put a lot of work, to put a lot of hours, and actually sometimes it's frustrating because you're going to fail so many times before you actually even get some positive results. The other thing that actually people need to learn is that innovation is sometimes unpredictable and depends on multiple and frequently uncontrollable variables. Sometimes actually the field changes drastically. Like, for example, nobody, was actually expecting the drug-coated balloons were going to be in such a bad shape right now. And the changes are so dramatic that you need to adapt and essentially move sometimes in a different direction. And no matter how much prepared you are, actually luck plays a major role in success. Being at the right time is actually sometimes even more important than actually having the right technology in your hands. One of the things that is interesting is a lot of groups have tried to determine what are the predictors of success and failure in startups. And as actually I said before, if you look at a lot of these papers and a lot of these publications, they say the most important predictor is timing. And I could not really agree more. Having a great technology and a bad timing is the worst thing that can happen. Sometimes actually you may have a mediocre technology, but it's a great timing because nobody else has it and you end up selling the company. So timing is actually one of the most important predictors of success. Number two, and I cannot emphasize this enough, building a solid, experienced team of people is extremely important. You would be surprised because people would actually think that to have a better idea or a good idea is the most important thing. Actually, it's number three in these analytical studies. Business model is not really that relevant. And believe it or not, funding is extremely important, but is not really the most important driver of success. So right timing, right team, and the right idea are the top three drivers of success for innovation. Another thing that is actually difficult to explain, especially to clinicians, is clinicians actually believe that ideas have value. And I have to tell you, an idea has zero value unless actually this idea is executed. And people really need to understand that in order to actually create value, there is a lot of time, work, infrastructure, and commitment that is actually required. And this is actually what translational research, experimental studies, patents, and actually clinical data brings to the companies to create that value added. There is a lot of risk of developing an idea or a product ahead of its time. And I want to just bring this back again because a lot of technologies have failed because a good idea is essentially invented late or actually is actually ahead of its time. So after hard work, the biggest determinant is being in the right place at the right time. There's no question about it. And I'm going to give you an example of a technology I got involved with very, very long time ago, actually more than 10 years ago. And this was a soft, super soft stent that actually aimed to treat vulnerable plaques. We're talking about 2005, 2007, a lot of excitement. This was a device that actually had a 50 micron wall thickness. It was soft. We did all this biomechanical work with the whole idea of shielding vulnerable plaques, which at that time, you guys remember, sounded like a hot topic. We can prevent heart attacks by shielding vulnerable plaques. We actually even took this device to humans, and this is actually fascinating because this patient already has over 15 years of follow-up. You see this lesion, moderate lesion in the mid-LAD, and we actually put that shield. It was actually without pre-dilatation, and you see the nice result. And you see the 9-month result is actually very nice. We actually completed first in human. We implanted more than 30 of these devices. Obviously, it was not an outcome-based study because there's no outcomes to see at 9 months on a study like this. But what happened? The company essentially collapsed. The reasons? Vulnerable plaque, when you look back, is an undefined, unmet clinical need. We didn't have any imaging predictive models to really actually plan a study that could be potentially positive. We had competitive technologies available, such as drug-eluting stents, and it was very challenging to start a pivotal clinical study. Oh, one actually little detail, the economy collapsed in 2007. So bad timing, bad actually predictor models, and not real difficulty launching a clinical study. So this is an example that I always like to give because this is actually the progression of Airbnb. And people don't really understand how Airbnb was successful. I don't know if you guys actually know, Airbnb started with 2 guys in San Francisco that actually could not really pay rent. A guy actually approached them and he said, listen, what about this simple website in which we can essentially share rooms with people? And that way they said, well, but actually sounds like a good idea. Well, I have to tell you, they had a hell of a time trying to raise money, and they could not raise money because people thought it was a very lousy idea. Who is going to actually rent a room in your own house to somebody that you don't know? But what happened? Economy went down. We have the global financial crisis, and actually it became highly desirable either to rent a room in your house to make extra money, or actually, get and actually rent a room in a city rather than actually pay an expensive hotel. All of a sudden, this business model actually became very interesting, and Airbnb essentially started to get traction. So timing is extremely important for startups. And this is essentially what happened. The beginning of Airbnb started with a housing bubble in 2007. Understanding the nature of the idea is actually more important than the idea itself. And this is actually one of the things I always tell companies. You really need to understand not only how good the idea is, but how many patents you're actually going to violate, the competitive devices that actually we have around, the regulatory environment, the cost and the inflection points. These are actually things that you really need to analyze before you start this project. Because sometimes actually it's actually even better not to even start. And this is an extremely important point that I always do this analysis before, I decide to get involved with any innovation program. Understanding the device class of application is very important because right now we're dealing with a very difficult regulatory environment. And there are actually devices that are easy to approve, and there are devices that are almost impossible to approve. And you really need to know what you're getting into before you actually start this process. And this is what actually I call that risk analysis. And this is a complicated graph, but just to underline that you should really categorize a project into, is this a device that is well known and is going into a clinical application that is known? Or is this device a device that nobody has used before in an application that has never done before? That is going to put the device into a low, intermediate, or high category. So if your idea and your invention is in a high category and it's going to take 10 years to actually approve and it's going to be extremely expensive to validate, this is actually something to really think about. Anticipate the failure modes is extremely important, because once you get into a phase, to go back again and redesign is extremely expensive. And actually to think and actually create a map in which you predict potentially where the device can fail is extremely important before you go into a first-in-human study. Because this is a big mistake that I see that happens over and over again. in which companies rush to get into a first-in-human with the wrong device and rushing into clinical studies when the device is not ready will cause massive regulatory delays, higher costs, and actually complications. Developing the right biological data is key, and the reason is because the value of the company is based on three things: patents, preclinical data, and clinical data. So the foundation of the data has to be absolutely right. This is what actually brings value to these companies. And that actually goes into working with real partners that actually understand what they're doing. I don't know if you guys know, but actually animal models are very poor predictors of safety and efficacy in the drug eluting stent world. And actually the porcine model that is commonly used, as you can actually see here, didn't actually provide good signals at the beginning of TAVR. So you really have to be very smart about actually selecting the people, the group, the labs, and the partners, to help you to actually take your ideas forward. So finally, this is actually my summary slide. From the strategic point of view, you have to carefully study the clinical opportunity. My advice is do not play in crowded fields. Evaluate the patent landscape. Evaluate the competitive devices. From the translational point of view, you really need to spend your time doing a risk development analysis, understanding the regulatory and development costs, the early biological proof of principle, have to fail and iterate quickly, and associate with the right team and people to be able to be successful. So thank you again. This is my last slide. If you guys have any questions, just let me know.
Thank you again, Juan, for this great overview. I have one comment. I totally agree with you that you said that idea value zero, and the process is long until you get to a viable technology, a viable device. On the other end, you cannot have a company without an idea. So you have to have the idea. The question is how to generate ideas. And I think if I think about the landscape of technology in Israel, I think that many ideas came from brainstorming. And brainstorming of many disciplines. It couldn't be only physicians. And the brainstorming is with engineers, with money guys, the VC guys, but mainly engineers from all fields. Engineers from Google and engineers from the military. You know how many ideas came from military technologies that were adapted to medicine. And I'm going to speak about heart failure sensor, for example, that came from military technology. So I think outside the box about how to generate ideas is to brainstorm with engineers from many disciplines. You should go to your local Google R&D and speak with the software engineers, with the mechanical engineers and electrical engineers in the high-tech company. They're just sitting across the street from your hospital. That's the idea of how to generate ideas. So what do you think about it?
No, listen. My comment was really not related to the generation of ideas, because you're absolutely correct. I mean, and if you actually look at our field, the great majority of ideas come from the need that is created at the clinical level, and the clinician saying, well, maybe I can actually fix this problem. What I meant was that people should not really stop at having an idea or believing that actually the value is in having an idea. Because I have to tell you, nowadays, it's almost impossible to have a unique idea. Everybody's actually thinking about similar things and actually colliding into the similar paths. So it is until you properly protect the idea and you start actually building some initial prototypes, and start actually creating what actually I call a biological proof of principle, is when you start creating value to that idea. Because one of the things that actually I see is, and this is a big mistake, is people keep generating ideas just believing that by creating ideas, value will be created. And value starts to be created when you actually start going into execution mode. So this is more actually a call to tell people, if you want to get serious about this, you really need to move forward into creating value to your ideas. But you're absolutely correct.
There's a question from the audience.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, yeah, John, great
Yes.
talk. Like when the Parmesan stent was about to be launched, Shah went to the FDA. That time Eric Topol was the head of the FDA, and he did not approve the Parmesan stent. And he said there is no varsity. The Eric Topol, he approved 4 devices. One is cold laser, hot laser, rota, and atherectomy without any RCT. So my question is it all time? Is RCT or who is heading the FDA? That is also important. If that guy is not in your favor, he may not approve your product or your new device. So all are important. Your luck, your timing, and is also the person who is heading the highest authority.
So the question is if all technologies need randomized control data to be able to be approved? Is that the question?
No. He approved the rota, the directional atherectomy, laser without any RCT. Eric Topol at that time, 1987, I think. But he did not approve the current stent. He said, come back with your large RCT. So there is a dichotomy, the double standards for some devices and for implants. That's what I'm saying. Had it been another person, by the time this animal experiment, first in human study has been done with Parmesan stent. That is a story he told us in Sarge in ASC 2018.
Yeah, look, I mean, I know the story, and I know there are a lot of stories like this, and you need to go back and look at the historical context of that time. I think, listen, going to the nature of the question, I strongly believe that there are a group of technologies that could potentially be fast-tracked into the approval process without the need of large clinical trials, especially because those devices are kind of ancillary tools. One example is, and this has been a big debate right now, since last year that we've been talking to the FDA, is, for example, drug-coated balloons. I mean, look at in the US, we don't have drug-coated balloons for in-stent restenosis. What is actually interesting is we don't have an approved device for in-stent restenosis in the US that is FDA approved. People use balloons, people use stents, but we don't have an FDA approved device for that indication. However, the FDA is actually pushing companies to go and do a randomized controlled study. Do you really need it? We can debate about that. But this is actually a very, very long topic and conversation that actually has to be carefully discussed, because also, people could argue that the reason why we found negative signals with stents with restenosis and thrombosis was because properly randomized controlled studies were done, and that was the foundation of the strong field that we have right now. But I agree that actually there are a lot of, shades of gray in between that, could have done in a different way.
I think in your answer to your question, I think that some technologies should require randomized control studies, like if there are disease modifiers, such as, aortic stenosis, you treat the aortic stenosis, or you treat mitral insufficiency with a clip. But some technologies, if they are, I would say, adjunctive therapies to what you already do, if it's an adjunctive to PCI, if it's adjunctive to TAVI that you do, this may require a short path, and I think the FDA is supporting that.
Well, Juan, thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure what we discuss these topics today. And I know you're involved in this particular symposium of innovations for a very long time, running these initiatives at TCT and also at TCT Russia. And we really see the progress of those discussions about new technology and implementations of this technology now in many clinics in many countries, including Russia. And specifically in these innovations coming from different countries, we're talking about innovations coming from Israel, innovations coming from the United States, and from any clinic in the world. And so next time we will see hopefully more innovations coming from Russian physicians as well. Thank you. We will continue our meeting.
We hope the same.
Thank you, Juan. You can say goodbye now. We can see you still. Thank you. Bye-bye. We're going to the next presentation. Amit Segev will present his topic, research of device-based therapy for heart failure. We need a different presentation. Пожалуйста, возрождение инструментальных методов лечения сердечной недостаточности. В связи с тем, что Хорст Сверд уже прочитал свои доклады немножко раньше, мы поэтому движемся вперед. Please.
Thank you very much again, and this time I'm going to actually expand more regarding my last presentation about device-based therapies for heart failure, and I'll try to focus on some innovations coming from my country. So first, these are my disclosures. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the burden of heart failure. I think it's going to be the new epidemic. Few comments about remote monitoring, which I think is going to be the mainstay of how we're going to treat many patients with heart failure in order to prevent their repeated hospitalization. And some percutaneous solution for heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, some subcutaneous, percutaneous approach to peritoneal dialysis shunts, and how to treat acute decompensation. So we know that despite current drug therapy plus current device therapy, about 1.1 million hospital admission per year is only in the US alone is due to heart failure. This is acute or worsening heart failure is the leading admission diagnosis in the US. The 60-day mortality is up to 15%. 3 months readmission rate is 30%. 6 months readmission rate is 50%. And the discharge status impacts long-term prognosis. And actually, if you think about what we can offer to patients with acute decompensation, there's nothing more than diuretics. So in terms of the cost, as I said, it's the first reason for hospital admission in patients over 65 in the US. And I think it is estimated that by 2030, heart failure costs are expected to be more than double, to $70 billion just in the US. This is almost 2% of the total healthcare spending in developed countries, and it is attributed to heart failure costs. And we know that there is a vicious cycle of hospital readmission. With every readmission, with every acute exacerbation, the natural history, as you can see in this curve, is going down with a bad prognosis after each acute event. And one of the aims of the future therapy, of the future management of heart failure, is to prevent these acute deteriorations, as you can see here. So this is one example of what can be done in terms of remote monitoring. This is a sensor that can be implanted in the pulmonary artery, and it senses the pulmonary pressure. And as you can see in the left side, there is a home electronic unit monitoring the pulmonary pressure, sending it to the physician of care, and you can see this graph where the pulmonary pressure is going up. You can actually contact the patients in order to give him instructions about augmentation of the medical therapy. And this is a study that was published about this technology, showing that you can actually significantly reduce the number of heart failure hospitalization using this technology. This is, as I told you before, this is an Israeli company which actually used a military technology. As you can see in the left side, this is a radar that can see through walls. So this is used by special intelligence, special units. And actually these engineers, they took the same sensor and they put it on the chest wall of this patient on the right. And this sensor can sense the amount of fluids in the lungs, giving trigger about accumulation of fluids and giving a clue to the physician, again, to augment medical therapy. And this is actually being implemented in four hospitals in the US, as you can see here. And you can see these bars, it's a little bit too small, but you can see a reduction of between 75 up to 87% of recurrent hospitalization when you use this sensor at home, remotely. Another aspect that we know about heart failure or heart failure decompensation is that the common path for all heart failure decompensation, both preserved and reduced, is the increase of the left atrial pressure or the wedge pressure. This is something that we showed that actually when you take a patient with pulmonary hypertension, for example, and you exercise him in the cath lab, you can see that the majority of them, as you can see here on the right side, they have elevated wedge pressure during exercise, identifying patients with heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. So this is a hallmark, and this is actually an underdiagnosed problem. And for this, there are some technologies dealing with this elevation of left atrial pressure. This is the interatrial shunt devices for heart failure with preserved and even for reduced ejection fraction. This is again an Israeli company called V-Wave. It's a very simple implantation of a shunt. You create an ASD with a procedure that takes about 10 minutes. As you can see here, this is the current version without the valve. The first generation was a valve and the thrombosis rate was high, so the second generation is valveless. And actually, if you compare this technology to the sensing technology, the major advantage of this technology is that the reduction in left atrial pressure is immediately. You don't need the cascade of sensor sending a report to the physician calls the patient home, telling him to increase the dose of diuretics. So it takes time, so this shunt actually senses the atrial pressure immediately. And this is from the work done in the reduced lab heart failure by the Corvia interatrial shunt, and you can see a decrease in 1-year peak pulmonary capillary wedge pressure index for walk when you use this technology. And this is the 1-year MACE combined with renal events and heart failure events, which is almost statistically significant. Small numbers, but very encouraging data about this technique. Another idea coming from a company in Israel that actually won the ICI 2017 prize for the best startup company. It's called Paragate, which is an implantable peritoneal ultrafiltration for fluid overload treatment. We know that peritoneal dialysis on the left side is a potential treatment for some patients with significant fluid overload. And the idea of this company is to actually implant a peritoneal ultrafiltration system without the need of external devices. As you can see here in this very short movie, they create This is an laparoscopic procedure. They create a pocket in the peritoneal cavity. They put this dialysis device, and using a laparoscopic, they create actually a catheter between this device and the urine bladder, and this is the idea about the Paragate. And they have some preclinical data showing that they can actually excrete isotonic fluid with low albumin secretion, which is the mainstay of this ultrafiltration. Another idea coming from Israel is this core assist. It's in the beginning, and it has been implanted, I think, in not more than 5 cases all over the world. This is actually an idea that you have a device that takes the energy of the preserved systole of the heart and actually give the energy back when you need to expand during diastole. This is a transapical approach with this spring device in the apex of the left ventricle. Another idea, again, a company coming from Israel called Magenta Medical. It is a transcatheter therapy for acute decompensated heart failure using renal decongestion technique. We know that in some of the patients, these patients suffer from severely congested kidney with poor renal perfusion, poor renal function, and fluid retention. And actually, you can insert a catheter in the renal vein, which is very easy to do, and decompress the kidney with this flow pump, allowing renal decongestion and improving renal perfusion, improved renal function, and fluid removal. It is safe. This is the console, and this is how it looks, the pump head, a very simple procedure. This is how it acts. As you can see, it goes from a catheter, and this is how it is applied in both renal veins. And this is actually they finished the first in-man study with several patients. They applied what they call the TRVD therapy 18 hours after hospitalization. And what's unique about it that you can identify the potential patient bedside. So you need to have clinical signs of acute decompensated heart failure. You can assess the IVC diameter. If it is more than 2 centimeters, it means that there is venous congestion. You can measure the CVP if it is more than 50%. 15 millimeter of mercury. These are probably the patients that you can identify bedside that this technology can be applied to them. And this is how it looks by angio. You see this very nicely, these 2 catheters in the renal vein. And this is some of the results. You can see the reduction of renal venous pressure when you use this TRVD system. As you can see here, the urine output is increased significantly with mean urine output significantly increased with sodium excretion, and this data is based on 10 patients, the first in-man study. And this is the reduction of creatinine after the TRVD therapy. In most of the cases, when you treat these patients, you have increase in the creatinine. When you use this technology, you get diuresis with decrease and increased renal function. So I think in conclusion, my thinking about heart failure, I think as I showed you, heart failure is a global health burden with high rates of repeated hospitalization and mortality. I think that prevention of acute decompensation is crucial, and there are some remote monitoring technology which are key to monitor patients at home. And I think we should expect more and more non-pharmacological heart failure therapies in the very near future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Amit. Any questions? So the very big topic on heart failure, and it's kind of the road without the end. The more we apply more devices, more technique, more methods for treatment of cardiac chronic failure, so more and more is needed in the future. What is your perspective? And again, talking about that technology, before you said this will overcome coronary interventions. How about the heart failure?
So I think it's going to be part of the change, the revolution. We're going to see more and more patients coming to the cath lab for heart failure dedicated procedures. I cannot predict the numbers, but we already see them. We implant shunts, and I also expect that the LVAD will be minimized, and it will be total percutaneous device in the very near future. And I'm not speaking about the hemodynamic support during procedures. So for sure, heart failure is going to be the epidemic of the future. I predict it, and we see them in our cardiology ward, in our intensive care. We already see them, and I think it's going to be more and more in the near future, several years.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. We have some changes in the program. What the next slide, please? Next presentations. So the next presentations by Dr. Gary Mintz on evidence that intravascular imaging improves patient outcomes. Gary Mintz.
Thank you very much. This was initially scheduled for a noon presentation, but as Alex mentioned, things had to be rearranged. These are my disclosures. I'm always amused when people say that there's not data that intravascular imaging improves patient outcomes after drug-eluting stents. These are all the published studies, randomized trials, meta-analyses, registries, IVUS in white, OCT in blue, and studies with both IVUS and OCT data in yellow. But let's just look at a few of these studies. There have been several major meta-analyses combining randomized and non-randomized trials of IVUS versus angiographic-guided DS implantation, consistently showing a reduction in MACE by about 25%, mortality by about 40%, myocardial infarction also by about 40%, and stent thrombosis again by about 40%. And even subgroup analyses, whether looking at complex lesions or patients with ACS, also show the same phenomenon. The largest randomized trials are two. They're both 1,400 patients. IVUS XPL, that was done in Korea, and Ultimate, that was done in China. And when I put the two studies side by side, you can see that angiographic guidance in the two studies were 5.8 and 5.4% events at 1 year follow-up, and IVUS guidance had 2.9% events, a 50% reduction in events at 1 year. And in the subgroup of patients that achieved IVUS endpoints, both studies had the same event rate, 1.5% at 12 months of follow-up. There have been meta-analyses just looking at randomized trials of IVUS versus angiographic-guided DES implantation. The most recent is now in press in Circulation Journal of Japan, showing that IVUS-guided PCI was associated with a lower incidence of mortality, MI, TLR, and stent thrombosis in randomized trial meta-analyses. So a reduction in mortality with IVUS guidance. There have been a couple of lesion subsets. One, IVUS versus angiographic-guided CTO intervention, again done in Korea, whether by intention to treat or per protocol, a reduction in events at 1 year follow-up of 7 to 2.5% based on intention to treat, or 8.5 to 2% based on per protocol analysis after accounting for crossover. There have been many studies looking at IVUS-guided DES implantation for left main disease. These are 2 meta-analyses that were published last summer, and you can see that both of them were associated with significant reduction in events, and especially all-cause and cardiac mortality. Since then, there's been a single standard randomized trial of angio versus IVUS-guided left main DES implantation with about 170 patients in each group, showing again a significant reduction in cardiac death as well as overall MACE. I'd like to highlight 2 recent studies, one just looking at complex lesions. This is a study from Samsung Samsung Hospital in Korea, looking at cardiac mortality based upon lesion complexity and patient complexity. And you can see whether looking at lesion complexity, bifurcation, CTOs, left main disease, long lesions, multivessel PCI, multiple stents, and calcified lesions, and whether looking at patient complexity, older patients, diabetic patients, patient multivessel disease, patients presenting with ACS or STEMI have a significant reduction in mortality at 1 year, at long-term follow-up. In this case, they have 10-year follow-up in a large number of patients. And even more recently, there is something in Korea called a CAMIR registry. CAMIR is an online registry of patients presenting with acute myocardial infarction in Korea. 20 centers enter their patients consecutively, and from November 2011 to December 2015, almost 12,000 STEMI patients underwent primary PCI, 9,000 with angio guidance, 2,300 with IVUS guidance, and almost 300 with OCT guidance. In the propensity matched cohort, a reduction in patient-oriented events was driven primarily by a reduction in all-cause mortality, and a reduction in device-oriented cardiac events was driven primarily by a reduction in cardiac mortality. And on the right, you can see the event rate at 1 year of follow-up in this all-comers registry. It's a carefully conducted STEMI registry in Korea looking at outcomes relative to patient presentation and the mode of therapy. This Bayesian meta-analysis by David Capodanno's group from Italy compared IVUS versus angio versus OCT, and you can see, according to their analysis, IVUS was better than angiography, OCT was better than angiography, but IVUS and OCT essentially had equivalent outcomes. And that is substantiated by the opinion randomized trial in Japan, in which 400 patients with IVUS-guided versus 400 patients with OCT-guided DES implantation had exactly the same outcome out to 12 months of follow-up. Finally, one brief word about patients with underlying renal insufficiency. If a patient has chronic renal insufficiency and during a procedure has contrast-induced nephropathy superimposed on the chronic renal insufficiency, the 1 year mortality is about 25%. People have tried many different approaches to reduce contrast nephropathy, drugs, devices, and so on and so forth. There's a simpler approach. You can do IVUS-guided PCI with zero contrast. If you do PCI with no contrast, you will not get contrast nephropathy. Yes, the underlying kidney disease may still take its course, but you will not hasten the pathway to dialysis by giving the patient contrast. So you say, well, how do you do PCI without contrast? It's really not that hard. You just have to think differently and use imaging and physiology. And the same approach can be used to patients who develop anaphylaxis when receiving contrast during a cardiac or non-cardiac procedure. We will be presenting our 100-patient increased cohort at TCT, and it's just remarkable what a difference this makes in patient outcome. If you can delay dialysis by even as much as 1 or 2 or 3 months, the patient's quality of life during that period of time is markedly improved. So I'm going to conclude with this editorial that Carlo DiMario wrote in analyzing the ultimate randomized trial in JACC last fall. And his conclusion, collectively, and particularly in view of the totality of the randomized trial evidence, there is no question that the use of IVUS, and I would say in parenthesis OCT, guidance to optimize PCI does improve patient prognosis. Against this background, there is no scientific justification for the observed inertia in integrating an imaging-guided strategy more broadly into clinical practice. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Gary. We have a patient ready for the live case. Thank you again. And what we will present the live case right now, and after the first patients, Gerhard Schuller will present his talk. Please come to the podium for the live case. Сергей Абугов, Ив Лувар, Михаил Адамян, Игорь Исипов и все остальные.
Вас, кстати, видно, друзья.
Коллеги, вы нас слышите?
Мы вас слышим. Баграт Гигамович, это Александр. Сейчас вот господин Агубов подойдет и с вами сейчас начнет беседу.
Мы хотим рассказать про нашего пациента. Сейчас Нора Карбика расскажет про пациента. Пожалуйста. У вас есть данные о пациенте, да, наверное? Ну, давайте покажите данные пациента. Данные пациента, пожалуйста. Отключите вот эту аудиографию, которая видна, и дайте данные пациента из зала.
Владимир Владимирович, у нас пациентка, женщина 73 лет, с диагнозом третьего функционального класса стабильности тонкардии напряжения, из сопутствующих заболеваний гипертонической болезни и сахарный диабет второго типа компенсирован. Жалоба пациента на давящие боли за грудину при классической стенокардии, при небольшой физической нагрузке, купирующийся покой и прием нитроглицерина. Из инструментальных методов диагностики обращают на себя внимание, что у пациентки сохранная фракция выброса левого желудочка. И при стентиграфии миокарда, покажите, пожалуйста, будьте любезны. Пациентка выполняла стентиграфию миокарда, и ей известно, что у нее стресс-индуцированное ощущение нижней стенки левого желудочка.
Да, давайте дальше коронарографию показывайте. При выполнении селективной коронарографии мы выявили бордюр. Покажите. Показывайте коронарограмму, пожалуйста. Выявляется стеноз более 75% передней межжелудочковой артерии. Можно в динамике посмотреть фильм? Фильм покажите.
Баграт Гамович, ну мы видели на прошлых слайдах, что есть стеноз 70% передней.
Стеноз 75%, имеем окклюзию правой коронарной артерии пролонгированную. Теперь мы включаем, мы вам покажем уже то, что сейчас у нас. Покажите первую серию, показывайте.
Значит, вот коронарография, окклюзия где-то на границе средней, проксимальной, дистальной трети, пролонгированная. Дальше, пожалуйста.
Включите, пожалуйста, будьте любезны,
Отключите,
поток
пожалуйста, картинки теперь, и мы подключаемся к камере из операционной. Вот контрольная коронарография, вы видите окклюзию правой коронарной артерии, все проблемы начинаются с средней трети. Мы решили использовать проводник Филдер, компания Асахи, покажите дальше. Провели баллон, значит, для поддержки, дальше, пожалуйста. Были определенные трудности, дальше, пожалуйста, мы подвели поближе баллон и потихонечку начали регионализировать проводником. Дальше, пожалуйста. Дальше, пожалуйста. Удалось проводник провести чуть дальше. Дальше, пожалуйста. Видите, потихонечку проводник проходит. Дальше, пожалуйста. Таким образом, мы его провели в дистальную треть, дистальное русло правой коронарной артерии. Дальше. Так, вот вы сейчас видите, вот мы на этом остановились, и сейчас значит, мы будем выполнять, будем проводить баллон через окклюзированный сегмент правой коронарной артерии. Здесь определенные такие трудности, но вот вы...
Какой баллон?
Мы взяли баллон, что вы говорите?
Какой
2 миллиметра баллон Маверик. Маверик 2 миллиметра на 15. Есть трудности, но мы можем сейчас подвести немножко катетер селективнее и попытаться провести баллон. Да, баллон вроде прошел дистальную треть, вы видите, да? Мы сейчас сделаем контрольную ангиографию, баллон оттянули, сделаем контрольную ангиографию. Пожалуйста. Ну, видно, что мы в просвете, теперь спокойно можем делать баллонную дилатацию. Начинаем, мне кажется, от бифуркации. Видите, от бифуркации начинаются проблемы. Сейчас подведем баллон до бифуркации. Вот где-то вот на этом уровне. Давайте делаем дилатацию баллоном Маверик 2 на 15. Давайте, дилатация. Да, у нас план какой? Я не знаю, как получится. Мы хотим выполнить реканализацию и баллон, стентирование правой, после чего выполнить стентирование передней межжелудочковой артерии. Достаточно. Оттягиваем назад. Еще раз дилатация.
Баграт Леонидович, а просто из любопытства, почему вы начали с окклюзии, а не со стеноза?
Ну, это классика, понимаете, известная вещь, что при окклюзионных поражениях, когда у вас окклюзия и защищена все-таки правая коронарная артерия, надо идти реканализировать окклюзированную артерию, а дальше идти на переднюю межжелудочковую. Хватит, дальше. Оттягиваем дальше проводник, то есть баллон. Давайте еще раз дилатацию делаем. 10-12 атмосфер. Достаточно. Сейчас мы сделаем контрольную ангиографию, посмотрим, как у нас обстоят дела. Делаем контрольную ангиографию. Поехали. Да, артерия открыта. Видите, дистальное русло у нас не важное. Поэтому, но здесь элементы спазма могут. Вот мы сейчас можем ввести нитроглицерин, посмотреть в отношении дистального русла. И после этого будем уже принимать решение о стентировании. Сейчас чуть-чуть оттянем проводник, чтобы он не вызывал дополнительных лишних спазмов. Лучше оттянуть его из дистального русла. Вводим нитроглицерин. И сейчас выполним контрольную ангиографию. Ввели нитроглицерин. Контрольная ангиография. Готов?
Секунду.
Снимаем. Ну, может быть, чуть пошире, да? Я не знаю, вот давайте посоветуемся. У меня такое предложение сейчас сделать ОСТ. Посмотреть, измерить диаметр артерии, длину, может быть, поражения, и подобрать стенд, который мы будем, наверное, не один, будем имплантировать в дистальную русло правой коронарной артерии. Какие есть мнения?
Ну, это очень интересно было бы посмотреть. У вас нет заклинивания, Баграт Гамович? Такое впечатление, что как-то очень интенсивно прокрашивается все.
Повторите, пожалуйста, упустил вас.
Ну, мысль насчет ОСТ выглядит очень привлекательно, а у вас гайд не заклинивает правую немножко, что-то как-то очень пропитывает.
Да, заклинивает. У нас, видите, даже тут еще мои коллеги умудрились убрать проводник у меня. Сейчас будем...
Вы фамилии, пожалуйста, сразу говорите, кто выдернул проводник.
Ну, это уже известно, не будем. Давайте пробный контраст дайте, сейчас мы его... Ну ладно, все вроде прошли, я думаю, нормально. Сейчас давайте чуть-чуть правее, Сергей, чуть его подтянем. Пробный контраст давайте сделаем. Пробный дайте сейчас. Пробный. Давайте серию сделаем сейчас, чтобы проводник ушли, и я думаю... Поехали. Ну вот видите, остается перед бифуркацией стеноз, да, вот вы видите. Мне кажется... Так.
А вы его
знаете, давайте сделаем баллонную дилатацию. Я думаю, надо вот баллонную дилатацию, покажите серию, сделать вот этого стеноза перед бифуркацией. Он остается довольно-таки тяжелым, предыдущую серию. Видите, да, вот тяжелый стеноз. Давайте баллоном 2 миллиметра чуть-чуть растянем его. Давайте дальше.
Делаем баллон?
That's if we are speaking. I think you are missing the PDA. I think there is a vessel that we arrive at the end of the injection there, which is the PDA. So it could be a good idea to put a wire there too. Maybe using a double lumen catheter.
Я согласен, Ив. Я хотел бы сейчас этот критический убрать, который дальше PDA идет у нас. Я сейчас попытаюсь убрать, и потом второй проводник проведем в заднюю желудочковую артерию. Давайте, сейчас это что у нас?
Это баллон и дальше
Сейчас
ОСТ.
баллонная дилатация, одну секунду. Второй проводник приготовьте, пожалуйста.
Такой же, будьте любезны.
Сейчас мы подведем баллон к сужению. Еще раз пробный контраст дайте, пожалуйста. Давайте серию сделаем и подведем баллон к этому стенозу. Поехали. Давайте. Перекрывает ее, видите. Еще раз серию делаем. Баллон перекрывает, я его оттянул, и мы сейчас попытаемся при введении контраста. Поехали. Вот так. Делаем баллонную дилатацию сейчас.
Готово?
Давайте. 10 атмосфер.
10.
12. Видите, перетяжка на баллоне видна, вот дистальной трети. 12. Хватит. Сейчас серию делаем, я баллон оттяну. Давайте серию делать. Поехали. Да, стеноз мы убрали. И как говорит Ив, давайте, я думаю, Ив прав, давайте мы проведем проводник. Заднюю желудочковую артерию. Давайте проводник. Баллон убираем. Второй проводник, и после этого делаем ОСТ.
Баграт Гамович, вот мы здесь с Александром Григорьевичем советуемся, и есть ощущение, что вот эти вот все ветки, это не задние, это все задние боковые, не проксимальные где-то задние оклюзированы отдельно.
Я не вижу ее, к сожалению, но у нас особых перетоков не было из левой, надо, конечно, целенаправленно посмотреть. Давайте мы сейчас какую-то другую проекцию, еще вправо, чуть-чуть краниальнее правее. Сейчас выведем и сделаем еще одну серию. Это тоже такая правда есть. Давайте сейчас вот так. Попытаемся сейчас еще одну серию сделать. Снимаем. Поехали. Ну, вроде она так не видна, да? Ив, что ты думаешь по этому вопросу? Вернись в ту же проекцию.
In fact, I don't know what is the biggest and the longest. The longest vessel is probably the PLA. The vessel where your wire is. But what is the real size of this vessel? We don't know. And this is related to the CPO. You have remodeling, so we don't know which vessel is most important. I will inject more and more nitrates in order to see if you can open this vessel.
Нитраты, давайте ведем нитраты. Да. Давайте нитраты вводим. Сейчас промоем и сделаем еще одну серию.
Еще набери.
Давайте сделаем серию, давайте. Ну, дистальное русло, конечно, она битая, она нехорошее дистальное русло. Не знаю, вот есть какая-то веточка, какая-то заднебоковая, наверное, правильно говорят коллеги, наверное, нет тут окклюзирована заднемежелудочковая.
Ну вот трудно.
Ну давайте сделаем майвус, а?
Трудно сказать, потому что вот эти вот три ветки там подряд идут. То ли нижняя из них заднебоковая, то ли задняя. Очень трудно сказать.
Давайте сделаем сейчас OCT, посмотрим, хорошо померим, хоть подберем баллон, чтобы мы решим, на каком уровне мы начинаем ставить стенд. Давайте OCT. Мы хотим вам показать, но многие знают, что такое OCT. Вот видите, сам катетер красного цвета, вот видите, инфракрасные лучи здесь. Давайте аккуратненько. Свет дайте. Сейчас мы померим диаметр артерии, это очень важно. Так, проводим дальше.
Кстати, я хочу сказать с гордостью, что я сижу под надписью «Аликян Баграт».
Спасибо вам. Видите, вторая метка, которая идет, это уже метка, которая средняя. Она соответствует дистальной части. Проводник лучше вперед провести. Здесь есть трудности. Видите, там, видимо, не очень хорошо продилатировали, я так понимаю. Сейчас мы его... Да, придется, наверное, нам баллонную дилатацию. Или суперселективно попытаемся сейчас. Может, это плохая идея, но попробуем. Поближе. Нет, давайте не будем. Давайте сейчас поменяем. Быстро баллоном сделаем дилатацию адекватную. Видимо, не очень адекватно сделали. Баллон дайте 2.
Баллон, будьте любезны. Баллон в ушко, пожалуйста.
Аккуратненько. Очень аккуратно надо относиться к датчику, потому что они очень хрупкие. Проводим баллон 2 на 15 маверик.
Я не знаю, кто у вас ассистент, но таких вежливых людей я не встречал. Чтобы будьте любезны в операционной, я в первый раз слышу.
Ну, повернитесь, пожалуйста, покажите себя.
Спасибо, Сергей Александрович.
Наконец я понял, кто у вас ассистент.
Так, проводим баллон 2 миллиметра. Давайте мы еще раз пройдемся, вот мне кажется, вот с этого места. Давайте. 10 атмосфер.
10.
Достаточно. Еще раз. Здесь. Достаточно. Еще раз. Достаточно. А вот здесь дадим атмосфер 15-18, может быть. Давайте. Место, где у нас были проблемы. 18 атмосфер, даже 20, по-моему, дал, хватит. Достаточно. Сейчас делаем ангиографию еще раз, снимаем. Поехали. Ну да, артерия широкая, видите, она открыта. Вот может быть вот эта, которая первая отходит, заднюю межжелудочковая, и то не уверен. Хорошо, делаем сейчас айвус. То есть не айвус, извините, а осетин. Пожалуйста. Проводим. Ну, артерия уже получше она выглядит, да, мне кажется?
Да вообще уже, наверное, заканчивать надо, уж больно красиво.
Ну, сейчас сделаем ОСТ и будем ставить стенты. Вот в зависимости от диаметра мы подберем сейчас стенд дистальную треть. И это принципиальный вопрос, поэтому...
Хотя да, в любом случае, не поставив фото, не поставив стенд, вы УМС не выполните.
Но тут не один стенд придется ставить, поэтому проводим датчик, двигайтесь, датчик поближе.
Можно на этапы разбить.
Двигайтесь. По ОМС этапы не работают уже, Сергей Александрович. Вы забыли.
С интервалом в 3 месяца.
Время вот прошло.
С интервалом в 3 месяца, Богдан.
Видите, катетер прошел. Вот так. Я думаю, мы нормально прошли, а теперь еще дальше хотите. Ну, давайте дальше проведем дистальную треть. Вот, я думаю, достаточно, да. Вот так. Все, да? Мы прошли. Вот этот маркер, который стоит, он как раз и... Давай.
Луковой. Достаточно? Хорошо.
Да. Монитор будет виден, да, сейчас у вас там? Подключен он?
Да, да,
сети,
видим.
да?
Видим.
Да, замечательно. Давайте.
Я готов.
Ввели контраст.
Нет, еще раз.
Сейчас мы еще раз видим. Здесь одновременно надо вводить контраст. Сейчас мы...
Maybe you are not in the osteon.
Ну, вот. Сигнал отключите. Еще раз. Готовы?
Я готов.
Вводится контраст и делается запись. Видите, датчик ушел. Давайте сейчас сделаем измерение. Видите, дистальное русло очень маленькое, оно практически обтурирует. Давайте дальше посмотрим. Сейчас оттягиваем датчик, да, уже. Он опять в дистальном третьем. Вот я выхожу. Вот так. Вот здесь какой диаметр? Очень важно вот в этом месте. Потому что это будет практически дистальная часть стента будет. Ну давайте, перезагружайте, у нас тут проблема с сети, мы сейчас сделаем так. В любом случае, так как время идет, мы должны ставить сейчас 2,25 на 32, так как пролонгированное. Первый стенд мы поставим 2,25 на 32. Дайте, пожалуйста, стенд.
А у вас баллон для дилатации 2.0 был, да?
2,0, да.
А гайд у вас шестерка?
Да, как?
Не маленький баграт-гем стенд, как вы считаете?
Стенд, вы знаете, идеально было бы, мы дотянем его, понимаете, можем дать и до 20 атмосфер, дотянем до 2,5, 2,6. Мы сейчас имплантировать должны все-таки, мне кажется. Смотрите, промус элемент мы вводим, и при атмосферах 18 это будет 2,5, а при 22 будет 2,6. Мне кажется, это будет достаточно. Ну, давайте пока подведем стенд. Сейчас пока вот перезагружает аппарат. Самое нужное время завис. Сейчас мы... Тихо, тихо, тихо. Держи, проводник, держи. Проводник, держи. Держи проводник. Проводим стенд.
Шприц, пожалуйста.
Давайте серию сделаем сейчас, чтобы понять, дистально поехали. Какое есть мнение? Оттянуть или, мне кажется, вот прямо вот здесь надо и ставить, видите? Там этот стеноз, который мы, помните, отдельно дилатировали, он сейчас буквально до дистального маркера за 2-3 миллиметра. Какие мнения есть?
I will pull a bit, just proximal to the second branch. Just proximal to second branch, I think it will be better.
Максимально вы считаете? Давайте сейчас подтянем.
Баграт-гем, у нас здесь есть три точки зрения. Одна ставить так, другая вперед, третья назад. Вы можете выбрать.
Так вот я середину сейчас выбираю. Давайте, поехали. Но мне кажется, надо... Видите, здесь мы можем перерастянуть, понимаете? А если мы поставим в дистально, мне кажется, ничего не будет. Либо надо чуть-чуть еще натянуть назад, понимаете, мне кажется. Что диаметр артерии очень маленький. Это там, тем более, практически обтурировал катетер, и мы не могли картинку даже видеть. Поэтому, может быть, чуть-чуть назад еще, вот чуть-чуть.
Просто если вы собираетесь бороться за эту бифуркацию, там, по-моему, сложно будет на таком диаметре.
Сложно будет. Либо надо пройти веточку, понимаете, дистальную. Но артерия очень маленькая, обратите внимание. Поэтому давайте мы вот здесь и поставим. Давайте здесь поставим этот стенд. На 8 атмосферах пока поставим. Очень аккуратно будем раздувать, медленно давайте. Как только откроется, мы... У нас 8 атмосфер. Спасибо. Давайте сейчас сделаем контрольную ангиографию. И посмотрим, что с дистальным руслом. Давайте снимать. Ну, вроде не так плохо, да? Вроде. Давайте, у меня сейчас такое ощущение, давайте мы сейчас подтянем, померим, второй стенд тоже поставим. Сейчас. Давайте сейчас серию сделаем, еще одну. Чтобы померить, какой нам нужен стенд. По маркеру вот этого стенда мы определимся. Давайте. Ну вот, видите, значит, у нас 32, да? Мы можем взять стенд 38 и мы выйдем в нормальный проксимальный сегмент, где нет. Вот это 32 от маркера до маркера. Давайте попробуем поставить стенд 2,75 на 38. Какие есть мнения?
Вполне, по-моему, вполне.
Давайте 2,75 на 38. И если к этому времени айвус будет, то есть у сети будет работать или как? Давайте сейчас. А вот после этого сделаем у сети. Давайте. Давайте стенд. Давайте. Стенд с лекарственным покрытием 2,75 на 38.
Вот, по-моему, в изгибе где-то отходит заднеисходящее, может быть, начало пульти ее, может, она чуть раньше креста отходит, а потом туда ложится. Но это так, из чисто академических.
Юрий Александрович, давайте мы сейчас уберем полностью, попытаемся все исправить, хорошо?
Конечно,
а дальше
конечно.
уже давайте мне пробный
Нет,
контракт.
это мы просто академические здесь обсуждаем с Александром Григорьевичем.
Да, я понимаю, пробный контракт дайте. Теперь давайте сейчас делаем серию и оттягиваем. Что?
Проекция.
Не понял.
Проекция в голове.
Нормально, нормально. Сейчас. Давайте серию делаем. Вперед немножко, да, вот так. Еще раз серия, чтобы не упустить вверх. Вот чуть-чуть назад. Еще раз серия. Надо все-таки выйти, чтобы не бляшки закрыться, да, потому что дистально мы вроде неплохо стоим. Еще раз серия, очень аккуратно, потому что частично обтурируем. Ну, в стенте, да, или чуть-чуть не хватает? Чуть-чуть не хватает, мне кажется, надо еще вперед, да, наверное? Давайте чуть-чуть вперед. Еще раз серию делаем. Ну, вроде нормально, да, маркер? Или все-таки... Мне кажется, не хватает, да, буквально чуть-чуть не хватает. Сейчас еще раз. Давайте серию делаем. Снимаем. И медленно оттягиваем, оттягиваем, оттягиваем. Еще раз серия. Поехали. 5 многовато, да? Ну вот сейчас вроде там, мне кажется. Еще раз серия. Открываем. Поехали. 12 атмосфер. Хватит. Сейчас сделаем серию. У сети работает. Давайте, хорошо. Давайте делаем серию, поехали. Да. Значит, мы в стенде, можно чуть-чуть растянуть нижний стенд, стыковку давайте сделаем чуть-чуть, да? Вот давайте вот здесь дадим где-то атмосфер, 14, давайте. Ну давайте. Стык. Хорошо. Достаточно. Теперь делаем осети. Сейчас сделаем одну серию и делаем осети. Давайте. Промыли, да?
Нет, одну секунду.
Давайте. Промой. Снимаем. Ну, какие есть мнения? По-моему, ангиографическая картина адекватная, да?
Да,
Может быть, не дотянут проксимальный сегмент.
Так,
graph, can we see the distal bed reduce the, or take another projection, you see the distal bed?
Давайте краниально сделайте, чисто краниально. Сейчас давайте смотреть, делаем серию.
Perfect.
Поехали. Мне кажется, мы, по-моему, правильно сделали, что отошли. Артерия очень маленькая, поэтому мы ушли от бифуркации и поставили там, где все-таки артерия была большего диаметра. Ну, давайте делаем OCT, да? Договорились? Согласны? Здесь, в принципе, все. Давайте. Да. Проводим датчик. Левую косу переведите, чтобы мы лучше видели. Двигай сюда. Двигай. Вот он, датчик пошел, свободно идет у нас. Доходим до стента. Вот сейчас делаем, можно чуть дальше пройти, но уже, да, все. Готовы, да?
Боковой порт? Нет?
Сейчас введем контраст и будем делать OCT.
Не готов. Да.
Подтягиваем назад, да? Подтянули назад, вышли, все. Давайте покажите нам теперь картинку. Вот появляется стенд, вы видите, да? Это дистальный отдел, да? Померьте диаметр, пожалуйста. Очень важно посмотреть, насколько мы адекватно имплантировали.
Очень красиво видно, как диссекция прикрыта стентом.
2,26? Дистально. Ну, мы его открывали на 8 атмосферах, как вы помните. Так? Дальше. Это проксимальный сегмент у нас. Средняя треть, да? Давайте посмотрим. 2,8, вы видите, 2,75, соответственно, мы его дотягивали, а дальше уже будет, наверное, около 3. Потому что мы ему дали до 16 секунд, да, атмосфер. Три миллиметра. Ну, в общем-то, видите, в общем, операция, я думаю, состоялась по правой артерии, она адекватно открыта. Есть вопросы по правой артерии?
Нет, Багратионович, очень красивая пластика, поздравляем вас.
У меня такой вопрос. У нас второй больной, но вы, если можно, рассчитайте время. Вот у нас осталась лекция профессора Шулера. Сколько минут у нас остается? И тогда мы могли бы выйти на несколько минут еще раз. Если остается время, посмотрите по программе, пожалуйста. Лекция профессора Шулера, и дальше остается ли время?
У нас, насколько я понимаю, остается 7 минут, и еще не прочитана лекция предыдущей. Да, и в 16:30 начинается уже следующая сессия.
А, то есть это лекция, то есть у нас время все, да, закончено? Я правильно говорю?
Да, да.
Тогда спасибо. У нас, наверное, вот на этом мы закончим следующую трансляцию.
Спасибо, Багратион.
И приглашаем. Спасибо. Спасибо. Все, да, уходим.
Следующий доклад Георга Шулера. hemodynamic support to high-risk PCR.
Ladies and gentlemen, mortality in patients who come to the hospital with an acute myocardial infarction and go into a cardiogenic shock is very high and has remained unchanged in the last 50 years. Despite this large effort, we only can trace it back the improvement to revascularization of the infarct vessel. So we are interested to see if the sole problem in patients with cardiogenic shock is low cardiac output. This is an example, a very typical example of a patient out of this group. It's a 59-year-old male patient who came to the hospital with severe chest pain, which has lasted for a few hours. His blood pressure was down to 77/61, and his heart rate was up to 120 per minute. And quite obviously, he was in severe cardiogenic shock. There was renal shutdown, and he had cold and clammy skin. His EKG showed these changes. There were ST segment elevations in all precordial leads and comparatively low ST segment depressions in the inferior leads. A acute angiogram was obtained, and it showed a normal right coronary artery which was open and free of disease. On the other side, the left main was subtotally obstructed and was the reason of this problem. We were able to recanalize the vessel. We did a triple inflation, and the LAD and the left main came out to be quite acceptable. The patient still remained in cardiogenic shock. He did not improve even after revascularization, and we were quite certain that this patient would not survive if we did not come up with another form of treatment. So this patient was put on an ECMO device for more than 10 days. He was pumped with 5 liters per minute, and finally, after this time, he came out and recovered from cardiogenic shock. Well, if we deal with assist devices like in these patients, it is very helpful if we have some very basic knowledge of these techniques. On the far left-hand side, you see a normal patient with normal coronary arteries, normal LV function, and blood pressures were normal. In the middle, you see a patient with acute myocardial infarction. In this patient, the Emax output was severely depressed. His heart rate was up, and the blood pressure was down somewhat. However, he was still within the normal range. It was not too terribly bad. On the far right side, you have a patient in cardiogenic shock, and you can see that there is severe depression of the maximal energy output. The blood pressures are down. The ventricle is in poor ventricular performance, and this patient most likely will not survive. These are the various assist devices which are available to us at the present time. On the far left-hand side, you have the intra-aortic balloon pump system, which has nearly disappeared from the market so far after the latest results were published. The second device is the impeller device, which is now increasing number quite significantly. It is very easy to implant, very few problems with operation, and it seems perhaps to be to the patient of beneficial help. Then we have the tandem heart, which is mainly used by our surgical colleagues. It takes some extra training for doing the transeptal puncture and inserting the large venous cannula, which I will show you in a moment. Then on the right hand, on the far right side, you have the ECMO device, a very potential, very powerful device, which can pump 5 liters per minute. It is easy to insert, however, it has one strong disadvantage, that is, it does not unload the left ventricle. We actually should need a second device, like the impeller device, to unload the ventricle for treatment. Here you can see the intra-aortic balloon pump, very easy to insert, very simple in operating, however useless. These are the final results of the comparison between intra-aortic balloon pump and control in patients in cardiogenic shock. And you can see that there is not even a hint that there might be a benefit from the aortic balloon pump. These are the changes in trends in mechanical support. On the top picture, you see the change in intra-aortic balloon pump. Of course, this is going down considerably. I must admit, I'm amazed that it's still inserted in 25% of the patients, although there is not even the slightest sign of benefit in any studies. Down below are the changes in the ECMO device, and the assist device, and the tandem heart device, and you can see that these numbers are going up. Here again, I think we should be a little bit more critical. There are no randomized studies at the present time which show a superiority of any of these systems. And it's without any real solid ground when we insert a large number of these devices. This is the last device, the heart-made percutaneous pump, which is very similar to the impeller device. The impeller is housed in a shield, in a wire mesh shield, so it does not cause any injuries. The motor and the controller are outside of the patient's bodies. This is also a very powerful device and is able to transport up to 5 liters per minute into the patient. This is a close-up device of the impeller pump. Here you can see the opening where the blood is drawn from the left ventricle and injected into the left ventricular outflow tract. The speed of rotation determines the amount of blood being pumped. Positioning can be a little bit hazardous sometimes. Here you can see an example. On the right-hand side, you see that there are no turbulences in the aortic ascendens in a patient with that correct position. On the right side, the position is incorrect. There are a lot of turbulences caused by blood in the left ventricular outflow tract, and this patient does not profit from this device unless its position is corrected. There are more helps. This is a differential pressure sensor which calculates a pressure curve, and which helps us to adjust the device at the right corner. I'd like to show you the procedure for insertion of the tandem heart device. You can see that the transeptal puncture is done from down below. It does take some experience because we want to use this puncture to put in this guide wire, which is then followed up by a very large bore venous cannula, and this may be a little bit touchy. So this may be a limiting factor to some patients. The ECMO device, again, as I said, it's a very powerful device. It pumps up to 5 liters per minute. However, it does not unload the left ventricle, which may be a disadvantage. Taking out the device may be also quite challenging. This is the device in operation. The patient can be moved around and turned. It does not affect the operation of the pump. The pump can also be used for not only for coronary patients, but also for valvular patients. Here in this picture you had a decompensating aortic stenosis, and this patient could be helped by a ECMO device for a few days. How should we select the devices and when should we implant them? You can see that there is a curve, the upper curve. This patient is doing very well. Actually, he does not really need a assist device, and it only causes problems and complications if we insert a device in this patient. On the other side, if the patient is doing very poorly, and if we waited too long to insert the device, the patient may not profit from this device anymore. So the right answer is right in the middle, as usually. We should insert the device while the patient is still recoverable, but not too early, not when he is not in difficult need of such a device. Taking out the device can also be a challenge. You know, that's a very large arterial puncture, F16, and so we have to make a very careful preparation for taking out the device after 10 days. We usually use a ProGlide, 1 or 2 ProGlides, or angioseal to close up the very large holes. And if we do it very carefully, we won't have any problems with bleeding or emboli. I would like to show you very briefly a few studies which have been conducted so far. There are not very many studies. This is one of them. It's a very small study. 48 patients with acute myocardial infarction were enrolled. These patients were randomized between intra-aortic balloon pumping and hissing device. Yeah. As it turned out, it did not make any difference to the patient. There was no difference whatsoever with the number of insults, the number of problems, and mortality. But this study was with 48 patients was too small from design error in any case. This is another very important study comprising 4 smaller studies. There were different devices, the tandem heart in 2 studies. In one study, the impeller device, in the second study also impeller device. And these were compared against intra-aortic balloon pump. Quite amazingly, the analysis, the multivariate analysis showed some improvement in arterial lactate. It went down in the pump device. And the same was true for the mean arterial pressure, which increased somewhat, even significantly. However, when we look at the total mortality, there was no change whatsoever. The last study was the PROTECT 2 study. It was defined as patients requiring prophylactic hemodynamic support during non-emergent high-risk PCI of an unprotected left main or a 3-vessel disease. These patients were collected, 448. They were randomized to either intra-aortic balloon pumping or to the impeller device. They were followed for 30 days, and after 30 days, there was assessment of the results. These are the results of this study, and they show that there is obviously at least a strong trend, in favor of impeller in both groups, and perhaps we should continue in this measure. The mortality was not different in both groups, but at least, as I said, there was a strong tendency, and this looks quite promising, and perhaps another greater study should be started. I'd like to summarize. In recent years, a number of assist devices have been tested in patients with cardiogenic shock or during high-risk intervention. Implantation and removal of the devices can be accomplished safely without risk to the patient. However, although the individual parameters, arterial pressure, serum lactate, have shown signs of improvement, and overall mortality has not changed, and we're actually just waiting for the one important study which should prove that a better left ventricular output can solve the problem in cardiogenic shock. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're heard, and we have to move to another session. Thank you.